Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So guys, I'm at the Left Forum this weekend. I hope I'm coming through okay. I don't have my other mic, so I'm using the mic from the camera itself. This video is not going to be the greatest video on the planet, and it looks kind of rough even as I'm seeing it. But nevertheless, I'm going to try it. I'm going to do my best. I have another event to go to, but I want to talk about this one while it's fresh on my mind. In fact, I'm stacking this up because I'm trying to get the camera. There we go. That's a little bit better. Yeah, just a little bit better. I want to talk about one of the events that I went to while it's fresh on my mind. The Zeitgeist one. One of the gentlemen there, one of the first groups I went to. I went to this last year also. He was, I guess you can call it, inspired by the Venus Project, or Zeitgeist, whichever you want to call it. Zeitgeist is just kind of the Venus Project in action. With this idea of what are the structures of a new society, and what does that new society look like? Now, the thing that people always run into a buzzsaw with is when you say, wait. I understand all of this new society, but how do you get there? In which case, everybody always goes blank. There's never a way to get there. It's like saying, in the future, everybody gets a unicorn, and everybody gets ice cream when they wake up in the morning. And the ice cream that they eat is nutritious and healthy, and so it nourishes their body, so that's the only meal that they need to eat for the day. And it's like, that's great, but how do you do that? Fuck if I know. It's like, fuck if I know. That's kind of how that feels. But with one caveat, and this was one of the most interesting sessions and tragic sessions. Now, it's two fronts. One, I always like to find that I'm right. And I get to the conclusions in different ways, but the conclusions seem to be somewhat right. But not right in absolute. The first gentleman goes through a particular Zeitgeist thing, explaining how he conceives of the structures of society being arranged in order to get you a society that has less conflict. With one caveat. The explanation of saying you must understand that the human value system at this point will be different. Okay. How do you change the human value system when all the incentives and drives in this particular current system push people to have essentially the behavior that they have? We're a violent culture. How do you pull guns out of a society that believes that guns is a right and is something that they must have for protection from the government and everything else? How do you do that? How do you... I've heard people even say, like, let's say automated cars. They would say, you're not taking me out of my car. Fuck that. I die before I give up the wheel. Now, this is somebody who I was making the point to of saying, you know, within 10, 15 years, you're not going to be driving my cars. The automated car is going to be safer. It's going to be less accident prone. And he's like, yeah, screw that. That's never going to happen. He's wrong, of course. He would be shown to be wrong. All I'm saying is, you have a society that pushes people in particular ways, and it invests certain things into those people, certain drives, certain aspirations. How do you get people to believe that money is not an essential part of your society? How do you get them to realize that money is actually the problem, or the thing that creates the fuck up in the society? Like, if you wanted to build a Hyperloop going from California to New York, and you wanted that Hyperloop to essentially be, you know, constructed with the most high technology and everything else, and money is the problem in that situation. You have the resources, you have the technology, you have the brain power, you have the labor to do it. Money is the problem. The thing that's going to come up is says we don't have the cash to do it. How do you change that? You know, I don't know how to change that. Like, you can't fault people. This is kind of going back to the puzzle of if you were a car salesman, a used car salesman, and as a used car salesman, you had a wife and a kid to feed. A person comes in, you know that car is a lemon, you know that car is going to shut down in 3 months, but it's going to be enough time for you to be away from it to say, hands off. Would you sell it? The fact is, regardless of whatever you want to consider your morality and all this other stuff, you're going to sell that car. You have a wife and kid to feed. Your morality is going to take a hit, especially when you have a wife and a kid to feed. Morality is this kind of emergent thing that's allowed based on the values of society and based on, you know, getting beyond certain things of issues of survival. But our society is not beyond issues of survival. In fact, it creates scarcity. It creates it. We don't have scarcity. You have enough resources to essentially get rid of poverty 7 times over. But we don't do that. We create scarcity. When you have all of these incentives, all of these drives, all of the things that pushes people into society, it's not that people are just horrible people. Some people are horrible people. But we on the left like to browbeat and say, why are these people acting in the way they are? That person needs a certain cash to make ends meet. He needs a certain amount to pay for himself, to pay for his kid, to pay for his family. And then you have this other added weirdness that the money itself, as opposed to just being the thing that allows people to pay for their needs, becomes a status item. People who don't have it, of course, get the low end of the totem pole. People who do have it, you get this feedback mechanism within the system itself that tells you, this is great, this is good. You have more access to the things that you need. Those other people don't necessarily have that, but that's okay because that's not really your fault personally, and that's one of those societal things that's just this kind of just violence and the anonymous violence of sorts. How do you get people out of that situation? How do you get people to give up their advantage of sorts? Because that's to some degree what you're asking. You're asking this plutocratic class that has all of these advantages, all of this money and all of these resources, to essentially balance those scales to some degree, to say, look, you need to give up some of that in order to allow these other people to live. How do you do it? Not to mention, you even have people fighting for the plutocrats, even though they don't have a dime to their name. There's certain things that our society drives in us. Our beliefs, our feelings, our culture, all that stuff is just societally driven. How do you change it? You have a hegemonic viewpoint that says cash is the best fucking thing on the planet. That capitalism is the only system that's possible. That people in polling said they could see themselves, see the world coming to an end before they see capitalism come to an end. These are just thought forms. These things aren't even real. How do you break people out of the mindset? How do you get people beyond the mindset where they can look down on this and see this is just a system and we can do better? It's not put here by God. One of the interesting discussions, because that guy, it was a collaborative thing where all of us was kind of pushing back and talking. But the most interesting part of this was the sociologists. So there's a sociologist who came to this particular meeting, and he gets out of sociology to some degree and goes into evolutionary biology and sociology. Now, I've always said that there's an element of the person that's them, but there's also this thing of society. Like, there's this odd intermingling between the thing that's that person, the bit of code that has that person with a certain workable point of view. But it's hard to distinguish what's that person versus what's the society. And oftentimes what you find is an odd amalgam of that person interacting with the elements of the society. There are things that that person pushes away from them. There are things that that person accepts. Both of those things are ways for that person to distinguish who that person is. Now, the interesting and odd part is that it goes further than me just saying that. He makes this argument that it seems that right-wingers and lefties are seeing the world in fundamentally different ways. That this is not about arguments. Now, you've always heard me say that people are not necessarily swayed by intellect, they're swayed by their emotions. When they make a choice, their choice is often emotionally driven, even though they come up with an intellectual argument in order to explain the emotion. When they're looking at somebody in an MRI and they would ask a person a question, they would find that the emotion goes first, and then, again, the intellect comes in to explain the emotion. That's what his research essentially showed. That ultimately, people are not necessarily swayed by intellect. That there are three things working at the exact same time. You have this thing that's somewhat them, that has a certain bias. So it's like right-wingers tend to be more threat-prone. Like, they would see things, they're more fearful, they're terrified. So they need their guns, the immigrants are out to get them, the Ruskies are out to get them. And he's making the point that it's not just that they bought into the BS. They actually believe it. That for them, for their body, when they're experiencing reality in a way that they're under threat. Lefties don't get this. Like, even going so far as to make the point that the amygdala of right-wingers is enlarged. Like, it's too big. Well, not too big. I joked that it was too big, saying they have a medical condition. But they tend to experience the world in a fundamentally different way than we do. This is not just a kind of surface thing where they're buying into the BS of a party. They are that terrified. For real. That's mind-blowing. Because lefties are not terrified in this way. Like, so when they were doing experiments, lefties were not necessarily prone to be terrified. Right-wingers were. Lefties tend to be open to new experiences. And this is one of those indexes that they were using. And this is not a flat fact for everybody. You would have some people who cross-pollinate. But ultimately, from the standpoint of just as things go, lefties were more prone to be open to experiences. In fact, everything that he described there as a lefty, I'm like, yeah, that works. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Like, he's like, a lefty would be more inclined to say, screw it, I'm going to college out of town. And not just that, I'm going to go traveling the world. And I'm like, yeah, that was me. Yeah, I'm going to go travel the world. Yeah, that was me. Yeah, opening new experiences. Yeah, bungee jumping, skydiving, traveling solo around the planet. And he's going from one item to the other. But he was making the point that the open to new experience was one of the major index on this. That right-wingers tend to be more closed-minded in regards to their reality. Even this idea of ambiguity. Saying that lefties tend to be more open to ambiguity, while right-wingers tend to need a certain amount of absolutism. So, this is the way it is, this is just a flat fact, this is how this goes. When that's not necessarily true at all. They just need to have that in their reality. Like, it was a fascinating talk, because the guy who's doing the Zeitgeist was kind of coming to this realization that it may not be that simple of trying to get people to come together in this kumbaya moment. If people are experiencing the world in different ways, that kumbaya moment may not necessarily be that kumbaya moment that you think it is. So, in an odd way, it was throwing cold water, but I don't think it was throwing cold water, and I'll explain what I mean. But from the context of the talk, making this point of saying there are fundamental differences in the psychology and even in the biology of people who are right-wingers, especially the hard right, versus the other part. Loyalty. Another one. Loyalty. And the, one of those items that's in the left, on the right, I'm sorry. So this thing of, it's my country and I'm going to bleed for my country and I don't care its faults. If we need to torture people, then we need to torture people. America. As opposed to lefties who are like, fucking torturing people. This is fucking horrible. We shouldn't be doing this. The loyalty in this case is loyalty to the country itself. Now, you can make an argument that loyalty to the country is also not wanting your country to torture. But for the most part, this loyalty thing comes in this idea of it's more important than actual truth or reality. This was a fascinating talk. Here's the thing. This doesn't necessarily change these ideas of a zeitgeist thing or anything else. Ultimately, these things are in ranges. The range that we have in our particular society is kind of like human nature in a capitalistic society. What are the ranges of behavior with human beings in a capitalistic society in this particular way? Human nature, to some degree, is like water in a vase. Now, I agree with him that there may be ranges in the sense of right-wingers and everything else. But that's just in this society. You may have a right-winger in another society, but that right-winger may not be batshit crazy like that. That right-winger may be towards the end of the spectrum, but that spectrum may be way in a different section of the political space, if that makes sense. You can have a community from the standpoint of a zeitgeist community and still have people that have different political allegiances. The question becomes, what is the level and the range of spectrum of those political differences? I would make the point that also the argument that you make is vitally important. They're unempathetic. Because they're unempathetic, or let me change that. They're empathetic to their own. Meaning if there was something that was in this kind of tribal fashion of people who were kind of like them, they would care about that. They would be massively hypocritical from the standpoint of something outside of themselves. But the argument that you make is vitally important. We tend to make arguments from the standpoint of moral basis. Like, you can't see that this human being is suffering and why that's a big deal. Whereas from their standpoint, that human being may be suffering because that human being fucked up. That's on him. Think of the Ron Paul thing where they asked Ron Paul should they let the person down the street, and they were like, yes! Let him die! Let him die! Didn't have health care, that's on him, let him die. That's the right. The left doesn't see it in those terms. The left tends to see it in humanitarian concerns. And this kind of bleeding heart liberal, or bleeding heart lefty, tends to be more likely true than not. This was a fascinating talk. And I understand that the guy who was doing the Zeitgeist thing kind of felt some kind of way, even going to the point of saying, yeah, it sounds like we're going to have two different societies where people in one society and the other. And I was like, dude, that's going to be a war because they're going to take your society from you if you do some shit like that. It's not going to work. All of you have to be together. There needs to be a united front from this standpoint. And you can't have this thing where people are being alienated and apart. You can make that communication. I have right-wingers on this channel. I have libertarians on this channel. You can make that communication. One of the key points in this thing, though, is not to be a hypocrite. Part of the reason that you had a lot of right-wingers that were willing to vote for Bernie Sanders was because they trusted Sanders. I may not necessarily agree with him on everything, but I don't think he's lying to me. That takes that's a massive leap. Or that's a massive step. And I think it's a step that needs to be replicated, especially from the standpoint of media, if we're talking about progressive and lefty media. Let's not be hypocrites. If we're going to stay with this idea of humanitarian concerns, we need to stay with this idea of humanitarian concerns. If we're going to be anti-war, we need to be anti-war, including things that the system itself may try to push onto people under this guise that something is going on. We need to interrogate those things. We need to be very clear in what we're talking about, and we need to not necessarily reflexively be against something that a right-winger puts out, or for that matter, a Democrat puts out. It just depends on the situation. I'm just saying we need to be... I guess what I'm saying, look, there are two things. I have no idea how to make that leap to get to the society that the guy's talking about. He has no idea how to get to that point. Jack Fresco has no idea to get to that point. And in my head, I make the assumption that all of this comes to a crash before it changes. That's morbid, but I can't see a change. I don't know how it changes. Like, for example, you have Uber focusing on automated cars, I think in like California. When automated cars get the final clearing, two things are going to happen. All these taxi drivers are going to lose their jobs, hundreds of thousands of people. Not because they did anything wrong, but because the market says it is more advantageous to have it's safer to have the taxi, but also we don't have to pay the human being. That car can go around 24/7. We can even set up solar panels on the car itself, so when the car just drives in perpetuity. Or we can set up a system where the car automatically goes to the gas station, there's an automated process to fill the car, and it goes back out. No taxi driver needed. You have your little device, you call for the car comes in, you get in, go put your fares. Credit, ATM, no human being in this process at all. None. The plutocrat who owns all of this essentially can hoard all of the cash from this particular enterprise. Now, what happens to the taxi drivers? To those people who were working in this particular capacity? What happens to the Uber drivers, the taxi drivers, the Lyft drivers? All of those people have just lost their jobs. And the main skill that they had at that point was driving a car. Now, the key point to this is that it's a good thing that those people are not driving that car. Just like if they had a burger to flip those hamburgers, that's a good thing that those people haven't do it. With all the capacities and skills that are affiliated with us being human beings, do we really want to limit those human beings to flipping a goddamn hamburger? With all of the skills, think of all of the skills associated with being a human. Do we really want to isolate that to driving a car? If there is a robot to do that job, I want that robot to do that job. Just like the elevator guy, and just like the car that replaced the horse and buggy. The problem here is not the fact that the technology is here. The problem here is the way our society is arranged that puts those people in a dire situation where they've just lost their well-being. We have the resources. This is the issue of perspective of the society itself. And I don't know how that quirk of perspective changes. So I have another meeting to go to. There's another one I want to talk to about McGovern. I'll do that in a separate video. That was an awesome one. McGovern, Max Blumenthal, these guys were talking about WikiLeaks. Credico. That meeting was fascinating. That meeting was utterly fascinating. McGovern is awesome. McGovern is absolutely awesome. Soft-spoken, affable, seems to have an amazing personality. And they're talking about the Julian Assange situation, WikiLeaks, and they're also talking about this thing of the Russiagate stuff. This stuff's nonsense. And he's, as a spy, has a certain amount of thing. He's making this point like, you must take into account all of the information that we have that's been released, including the CIA files, meaning the Snowden leaks, showing that the CIA had all of these hacking tools, even the capacity to make those things mimic other countries. And the media looks at this and says, that's interesting. It's like, but wait a minute, you've just said that Russia hacked us and all this other stuff, and the CIA has just, it's just been released that the CIA and NSA had these hacking tools that can mimic other countries. Yeah, we're not interested in it. Like this oddity of the media that ignores certain things while emphasizing others. Like the weird collusion between Trump and Israel before he got elected, which, if you're being honest, that's the thing that breaks the foreign policy thing. Meaning that's the collusion that you're looking for, trying to get the vote to be changed in the UN. Because if you remember, the United States abstained from that particular vote, where they condemned Israel for the behavior. It was Obama's leaving vote. I suppose he wanted his legacy to show that he backed away on one of these votes where Israel was murdering a lot of people. Israel was working with the Trump campaign to try to get Russia to essentially stop them from being condemned. It was a weird thing. But the collusion in this case wasn't Trump and Russia. It was Trump and Israel. Nobody cares about that. Nobody cares about that. It's so bizarre. There was something else. There was something else. Max Blumenthal was really good. He was amazing. Like facts, figures, these interesting insights into the people and what they were doing before they were given a story. Like for example, you read a news story, and as you read the news story, you know, you come away from this from the perspective as if the news story, whenever you read it, it also oftentimes gives this perspective of God's perspective, as if this is an objective viewer standing in the ether somewhere observing this particular thing. That's not the case at all. That is the perspective, and that's the feeling that you get when you read those things. Oftentimes what you see, though, is person in the administration said this. Person in the intelligence service said this. Person in the, you know, usually these are governmental sources that are just given information. The media person often doesn't really take a perspective. He's just a stenographer, meaning you're really just getting the state perspective of events. That's not what media is supposed to be. And Max Blumenthal kind of makes that point in an amazing way, oftentimes going to the thing of saying, when you're reading those stories, oftentimes you have to pay attention to the person who's writing the story. And Max Blumenthal breaks down, oftentimes, many of the people who are involved in the process, what those people were doing beforehand, and the fact that those people are besmirched, to say the least. And you have to challenge the source. McGovern has gotten to the point where he's gotten more hawkish on the Spygate thing, saying, yeah, there's something there. And the media is not paying attention to it, even though they should be paying attention to it. This stuff looks weird, this stuff looks bizarre. And if they believe that CIA or NSA is not necessarily involved in this, this is nonsense. It's crazy. Going so far as to implicate Clapper and what is his name? Brendan. Not Brendan, I can't, it starts with a B. Into the Russiagate stuff. Like, this meeting was fascinating. So, I'm going to talk about that one after I get back. But, so far, so good. I went to the first two this morning. I've been up all night. I was on a bus ride. I thought I was going to get some sleep on the bus ride, and I ended up a friend that I haven't seen in a decade. I'm wearing my NASA shirt. I'm in 7-Eleven getting some before I get on the bus, and I hear my name called out. and I see somebody running over hugging me, and I haven't seen her in like a decade. I've seen her like a decade. Just a random meeting where she's on the bus, so that means we're talking on the bus the entire way through. So up until 7 a.m., wide awake, wired, getting to the hotel, running from point A to point B. Long story short, I've been up for the past 30-something hours. So I may fail in my goal to have this conversation when I get back to the room, but I'm going to try. I do want to see this one meeting coming up, but I definitely want to talk about the Credico thing. Credico was talking about WikiLeaks, and that meeting, for the most part, was WikiLeaks and Russiagate, and that thing was jam-packed. That was one of the most packed ones that I've seen up to this point. So I'm going to end this here. Loving the Jamal on tour video. That's funny. Was she hot, Jamal? Was who hot? Edward Klein. It's so awesome that Jimmy Dore's going to be able to... Yeah, I spoke the door. Baltazar. Maddow's safe word is Russia. Dow is press Hillary Clinton. Credico was talking about her too. Oh man, they were ribbing on her like nobody's business. Calling her like a conspiracy theorist, saying that, you know, for all of Maddow supposedly getting involved in understanding what's taking place, Maddow had no clue, or for whatever reason paid no attention to the fact that Trump was colluding with Israel and that stuff. Yeah, they were putting a knife in the Russia thing like nobody's business. It was an amazing get together. So I'm going to end this here. Balthazar, thank you very much. That's always appreciated, and super chats always help. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support the Patreon. Ideally, I will see you guys in a few hours. Thanks, guys. And we are...